New Year. Happy New Year. On behalf of the Child Care Resource Center, it's my pleasure to welcome you all here this morning. My name is Donna Sneeringer. I'm the Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer. And this is our, I can't even tell you how many years we've been doing this event. I'm thinking 25, 30. So this is a regular tradition for our agency and really a chance to kick off the year talking about the policies that are most needed to support children and families in California. We are very excited to have so many of you in the room today. We've got about 100 people joining us here at Cal State Northridge, and in addition, about 50 people online, and a watch party in the Antelope Valley. Shout out to the Antelope Valley Best Start. The Best Start community up there is having a watch party, so we're excited to have so many people from so many places listening in and participating today. We also are happy to be joined today by some key legislative staff. In the room today, Andrea Rosenthal, the District Director for Assembly Member Pilar Schiavo, is here. She's waving from the back. And online we have Debbie Look from the Assembly Committee on Education, Margaret Hamlin-Grady from Senator Nancy Skinner's office in the Legislative Women's Caucus, Erin Gable, who is the Assembly Budget Subcommittee number 3 on Education Finance Consultant, Kimberly Fuentes, who's an analyst, policy analyst with Senator Carolyn Menjivar's office, Elizabeth Schmidt, who's with the Senate Budget Committee, and Kelsey Castillo, who works for the Speaker of the Assembly, Robert Rivas. So we welcome them as well. So often our events focus a great deal on childcare, and obviously with our name, that's our founding principle that childcare matters for families and children. But as we have evolved and grown as an organization, we also realize that there are a lot of things families need, and we continue to broaden our services and broaden our understanding to meet the needs of families throughout our service area and throughout the state. So we thought it was important today to really step back and think about family. And what we all know as humans is family is the core fundamental of our lives and our communities. And when families do well, our children do well. So our hope today is really to step back and think about what we are doing to nurture our families and making sure that they have what they need to help their children become successful. Childcare is obviously one of the things they need, but there are many other things. And we're hoping through our speakers and our panel to really broaden everybody's understanding of the challenges families are facing. And we have some interesting feedback from actual students at Cal State Northridge in a video that I think you're going to enjoy. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So my pleasure this morning is to welcome Kay Jones. Dr. Kay Jones serves as the Assistant Secretary for Program and Fiscal Affairs at the California Health and Human Services Agency. Dr. Jones was previously Legislative Director to Assemblymember Dr. Joaquin Arambula from 2020 to 2023. They previously advocated on voters' rights and social justice issues in the inaugural Trudy Schaefer. They were the inaugural Trudy Schaefer Advocacy Fellow at the League of Women Voters. And before their time in the Capitol community, Dr. Jones was a scientist specializing in the autism spectrum disorder. They received their Ph.D. in interdisciplinary neuroscience from the University of Missouri and a bachelor's in psychology from Ohio State. They completed their postdoctorate work in the field of immunology and epidemiology, which has been busy these past few years, at University of California at Davis. If you could please join me in welcoming Dr. Jones.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Donna, and shout out to the Antelope Valley Watch Party. I'm honored to join you all today and welcome you to the 2024 Leave No Family Behind Policy Forum, where we'll get to discuss family well-being across California. As Assistant Secretary for Program and Fiscal Affairs at the California Health and Human Services Agency, I come before you today acutely aware of the challenges and the opportunities that shape the lives of our fellow Californians. Our great state is a tapestry of vibrant economies and communities, each with its unique characteristics and needs. Today, we gathered with a shared commitment to understanding and addressing the dynamics of family well-being across these diverse contexts. In our relentless pursuit of a healthy California for all, we have undertaken significant initiatives to ensure every individual belongs to a strong and thriving community. This includes the exciting Health for All expansion that went in effect January 1st of this year, in which all Californians can qualify for full-scope Medi-Cal regardless of their immigration status. We have also supported families by more than doubling the number of slots for subsidized childcare and development programs, with the continued goal of reaching 200,000 expanded slots. The Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative stands as a testament to our dedication to the mental health and well-being of our children and youth in California. By centering on the needs of young people and uniting the efforts of the agencies and organizations that serve them, the initiative seeks to ensure our kids and families can find the support for their emotional, mental, and behavioral health needs when, where, and in the way they need it most. We are also working to improve the outcomes for children living in extreme poverty and foster care, and in the juvenile justice system by addressing adverse childhood experiences, early childhood and education needs, and improving access to physical health, mental health, and social services. Our commitment to family well-being extends to the robust social safety net programs. For example, CalFresh helps us keep over 1 million Californians out of poverty by helping them get access to healthy food. Together with the Department of Social Services, we are focused on targeted outreach strategies to reach more of these eligible populations. Strategies vary, but will be customized for non-English speakers, older adults, seniors, populations with disabilities receiving SSI, and other priority populations. Focused efforts also include student populations enrolled in higher education, those being released from incarceration, and others. These are just some of the investments and efforts that we are making together. There's so much more that we're doing across California to integrate these services, to pair them with the historical investments in expanded healthcare access, transforming children and youth behavioral health, innovating through CalAIM, and a lot more programs. As we engage in discussions today, I encourage each of you to bring forth your insights, experiences, and innovative ideas. It is through listening, collaboration, understanding, and a shared commitment that we can forge a path forward toward a brighter, healthier future for all Californians. And in my closing, I extend my greatest gratitude to each one of you for your dedication to the well-being of our communities. Together, we can create a California where every family and child can thrive. Thank you.
Good morning and Happy New Year. My name is Patrick McFarland. I'm Government Relations Manager at CCRC, and I'm here to introduce Dr. Michael Olenick. Dr. Olenick has been President and CEO for CCRC for 20 years. He oversees all programs, projects, and services provided to over 75,000 children and families each month in a service area spanning 22,500 square miles. He is responsible for managing 1,200 staff and a $600 million budget. For more than 3 decades, Dr. Olenick has chaired numerous boards and committees at the county, state, and national levels. He was a governor's appointee to the California State Advisory Council on Early Learning and Care, and an appointee on the Speakers of the Assembly's Blue Ribbon Commission on Early Childhood Education. He currently serves on the California Child Welfare Commission, in addition to serving on the board of directors of 0 to 3, the nation's premier voice for babies. Dr. Olenick was named one of the 200 most influential people in the San Fernando Valley by the San Fernando Valley Business Journal for the past 6 years. Dr. Olenick?
Good morning, and welcome to our, I believe it's our 35th annual policy forum that we've been doing. The first one was, I think, about 1988, and I was the keynote speaker. I had just finished my doctorate and presented some data that I had collected on childcare throughout LA County. it was done in a basement for about 8 people. So it's nice to see a big crowd. And Aaron Gable, I know you're watching. No, you can't ask me any questions. So my job this morning, I have actually 2 responsibilities. The first one is to introduce Dr. Manuel Pastor, and then after that, we will have a panel discussion. So I'm going to start with introducing Dr. Pastor, who I've known for quite a long time. He's seen quite a number of his presentations, so I think you're all going to be very interested in what he has to say. He's the Distinguished Professor of Sociology and American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California, even though some of us are UCLA alumni. And he's the chair, and I'm not going to pronounce the name of the chair, but he's the chair in civil society and social change at USC and holds an economics Ph.D. from University of Massachusetts in Amherst. So Dr. Pastor's research generally focuses on issues of economic, environmental, and social conditions facing low-income urban communities. And he has 2 recent books that were published in 2021. And you can go online, I think, to order them. The first one is Solidarity Economics, Why Mutuality and Movements Matter in South Central Dreams, Finding Home and Building Community in South LA. He also has a previous book that was called State of Resistance, What California's Dizzying Descent and Remarkable Resurgence Means for America's Future, which came out in 2018. Be interested to see whether he still thinks anything he wrote in that book is still relevant. And it was lauded as a New York Times review as concise, clear, and convincing account of political transformation in the Golden State. So he speaks a lot. He's on a lot of different commissions and committees, but most importantly, he's been married for 42 years. So with that, Dr. Pastor, it's all yours.
Thank you. I did ask Michael to mention the 42 years thing just in case my wife was out there. So I don't know about you, but I make New Year's resolutions. My resolutions for this year are home, health, and heart. Speaking from the heart. My other New Year's resolution, having arrived here just a few minutes after this started, is to pay more attention to what my map is telling me to do, rather than relying on my historic sense of where Cal State Northridge is. So I'm gonna get started with data, because what could be better than data? So if you think about the data that's important to you, a lot of it has to do with demographic change. A lot of it has to do with some geographic change that I'm going to point out. And a lot of it has to do with the economic situation of the parents that you deal with. And of course, the sort of headline story about demographic change in the United States is that we're slated to become majority people of color by about 2045. It is a future that fills some people with dread and fear, which is what's driving our national politics. It's also a future that fills some of us with joy, because we keep thinking that the rest of the country will learn about the joy of a Korean taco truck and what could be wrong with that. But in fact, that is part of the story, because if you look at the demographic change in the United States between 2000 and 2050, going from being a little bit more than 2/3 non-Hispanic white, being less, or to being majority people of color, that's basically the change that California went through between 1980 and 2000. And in many ways, California was America fast forward, which is exactly why that book is still as relevant as it ever was. But the interesting thing about that is that a lot of the rest of the country thinks that the demographic change that's going to go on in the rest of the country is really just going to continue to happen in California. That somehow by the year 2050, California will become 150% Latino. There'll be sort of super Chicanos marching the earth. They'll definitely be at CSUN, because this is the center of Chicano studies. But in fact, if you look at the demographic change, it's slowing down in California. And it's actually dramatically slowing down in Los Angeles. If you look at the demographic change in terms of ethnic change, what you could see is that basically the Los Angeles of the future is the Los Angeles of today. That is that we have a very slow growing Latino population. Why is that? Most of our Latinos are actually more US born, and we have much less immigrants coming into Los Angeles than ever before, partly because of high housing prices that'll come up again. So if you're thinking about future, uh, the future really is now here in Los Angeles. And another part of that can be seen is what's going on in terms of the share of the United States that's foreign born, the share of California that's foreign born, and the share of LA that's foreign born. The share of LA that's foreign born actually peaked in about the year 2000 and has been falling since. This is a big change for us because in the 1970s and in the 1980s, fully 1/4 of all of the immigrants coming into the United States settled in Los Angeles County. 1/4. That is a huge number. And so what was big change, big conflict, big adjustment actually is now something that's happening in the rest of the country, which is partly why you're seeing the political freakout that's occurring. And we are, in fact, settling into being much more US born. And you can see this also, this statistic shows you the share of immigrants in the United States that live in California. And in 1990, about a third of all the immigrants in the United States lived in California. Now it's about 22.5, 23%. So immigrants are arriving in places that people didn't expect: Georgia, North Carolina, Arkansas, Idaho, and elsewhere. And we're actually getting a much more settled immigrant population. Another statistic, which this is brand new for just this audience, who you are so special. This is the change in kids, the population under the age of 18. And usually I've done those from 2000 to current day. This breaks it between 2000 and 2010, and 2010 to the last year, 2022. But you're going to see something that's kind of interesting here, which is that first you see a dramatic decline both in the decade of the aughts and then in the teens plus a few years of non-Hispanic white youth. Real decline. Now, that's not that, roughly 1.7 million young whites died. We would have noticed that. There would have been a big news story about it on Fox News. It would have been blamed on Obama decades ago, but still everything is his fault. So really what's going on is there's more young whites moving into 19 and 20 than into 0 and 1. So the number of young whites falls. What you can see is the number of young Black folks has also fallen dramatically. Some of that is people redesignating into multiracial, not all of it. During the aughts, there was a big increase in the number of young Latinos in the state of California, but actually the number of young Latinos in the state of California is falling. And it's been most dramatic here in Los Angeles. This is a great statistic for you to bring to any cocktail party, because if you're at a cocktail party and you start talking statistics, people will find you so exciting. It's really incredible. The only large metro area in the United States that's seen a decrease in the number of Latino or Hispanic children in the last decade. Do you know what metro area that is? LA. Every other metro area has seen an increase in the number of Hispanic kids. In LA, it's been a decrease. Now, why is that? And what's going on is that our immigrants are much more settled than immigrants in the rest of the United States. And as immigrants settle in, their family formation patterns get closer to the US norm of just having a couple of kids and reproducing themselves. And so people are having less kids, and it's driven as well, we'll see at the end, by housing prices, that is young families moving out to the Inland Empire and to Central California. So what that's left us with demographically, you could see here clearer than I can because the chart I'm looking at here is pretty tiny. The big news here is that for Latinos, the majority of Latinos are US born in LA County. The majority of Asians are actually foreign born. That's a big difference between those two growing ethnic populations. But the legacy of this is that immigration left its marks on Los Angeles County. And one of those marks that you might think about is the undocumented population. Now, despite the recent increases in people crossing the border, up until that, the share of undocumented people in the United States has been steadily falling since 2007, mostly because of the financial crash and people moving back to Mexico, for example, because economic situation in the United States was not that good. And what that's meant is that increasingly documented immigrants are long settled. So for example, in LA County, more than 70% of the undocumented population has been here for more than a decade. As a result, what do? Find love, have families, settle in, become a permanent part of our infrastructure. It's one of the reasons why we've taken to not talking about undocumented immigrants and talking about undocumented Californians. Deeply rooted, deeply who we are. And as you can see from this statistic, the number of undocumented folks in Los Angeles County is actually outnumbered by the number of US born family members, mostly kids, but aunts, uncles, etc., who live with them, and the number of green card holders, lawful permanent residents, who also live with them. So this means, I'm just going to move to this statistic, which is most relevant to you. Fully 20% of all children in Los Angeles County have at least one undocumented parent. That is why the struggle to make sure that undocumented parents are able to receive the earned income tax credit, a fight that was led by my colleague Shamika Gaskins, along with many, many others, and to which I contributed one or two data points that were potentially helpful. Has been so important. It's why getting insurance to undocumented folks is so important. It's why making sure that every part of government is open to our undocumented brothers and sisters is so important. These are the kids of the future. Now, one of the reasons why this is all so important has to do with changing demography. Now, when I talk about changing demography, what most of you think about is the changing color or hue of our population. It's the way it's generally framed. But as I've mentioned to you, in LA and in California, really, that aspect of demography is not changing all that much. But you know what is changing? We're aging. And in particular, I mean, it's a really interesting thing. When people have thought about aging, they think of an older white population aging. That's part of the story. Here's a little secret. Latino, Black folks, Asian people, we also get 1 year older every year. And the big story is that California's share of the above 65 population is growing dramatically from about 11% in 2010 to about a quarter in about 2060. And as you can see here, the share of kids is falling dramatically from about 10% of the population being 0 to 5, for example, in 2010, to that population being around 7% in California in 2050. And it's falling most dramatically in Los Angeles. And you can see this by looking at maps, because he doesn't like maps. This is the share of the population that's between 0 and 5 by county. the darker areas mean more kids. You can see already that there are more kids in inland California, and that the coast is a little bit lighter, meaning having less kids. When we move to the year 2030, let's look what's happened to LA County. The share of children is falling dramatically. Where the children will be is the Inland Empire and Central California. Another way to see that is through these charts, which show you in the middle, this is the share of all the children in the state who live in a particular area. So you can see that the share of all the children in the state who live in Los Angeles is going to fall dramatically as we move from 2010 to 2030, 2060. And it's going to be increasing in Central Valley and in the Inland Empire. That's where young families are moving, and young families are not settling here in Los Angeles County in the numbers that they once were. So a couple things that come to a conclusion, because I was asked to deliver a keynote, and then I was told that I had 15 minutes. So this is what we call in Spanish a keynotito. So you have to really kind of, go through the data quickly and wrap your way into an emotional and stirring conclusion. So one thing to keep in mind is that even as we're experiencing in LA County, this kind of situation of our families moving away, young children, share of people who are young children declining, let's look at a very particular reality of racial inequality. And this is something a lot of you might be familiar with. This is median household income by race. And you can see that there's a pretty dramatic difference between the white population, the Black population, and the Latino population. In LA County, the Asian population, its median household income is actually below that of whites. It's not true of the state as a whole, but it is a characteristic of LA County. And one footnote for those, it's an important footnote, of all of these populations, the Asian population is the most heterogeneous in terms of its education and median household income, meaning that you've got South Asian, Indian engineers, and you've got Vietnamese nail salon workers, and it's all put under one population. And the sort of spread and difference between those populations is much larger than even within the Latino population or the Black or the white population. So when you're looking at median numbers for Asians, just remember that we need to go beneath that, not in a keynotito. But the thing for you to understand here, this is a chart looking at racial inequality, which of course would be worrisome. And what I want to do now, this is the same y-axis, so the same scale, same groups. But what we're going to look at is households with children under the age of 5. Watch what happens to the inequalities. They increase dramatically with white households. I think that's about $125,000 median household income, and Black and Latino households coming in at around 50,000. So it's sort of twice as much income, a little bit more for white households raising children. This is a situation that's baking racial inequality in, and everything we can do to change that is important, and I'll get to that at the end. Last couple of things for you to kind of pay a little bit of attention to. This is looking at real median household income by region. The region at the top is Santa Clara County, Silicon Valley. You could see that in the last decade, basically run away from the rest. You could see that LA County has not been doing that well. It's kind of on the bottom, and it's sharing the bottom with the Inland Empire. But now let's look at housing prices. And one of the things you're going to notice is sharp uptick in housing prices, particularly in LA County. even though the incomes have been as stagnant as in the Inland Empire. So this is part of that phenomena pushing people out from here and into other locations. So what are the 3 messages I want to leave you with? Of course, I will leave you with 3 messages because I am a lapsed Catholic and I believe that everything comes in a Trinity, despite having lost parts of my faith. So first thing is that there's a tremendous power to being able to disaggregate data and then use it to develop equity metrics for accountability. If anybody asks you for just the average or the total, reject that and try to figure out how you can disaggregate it by race, how you can disaggregate it by nativity, how you can look at the situation of undocumented, because it's all of those things that make a difference. And if you want to do this on your own, there are 2 cool websites that we help to maintain. One is the National Equity Atlas, which has disaggregated data on the top 150 metropolitan regions in the United States, the largest 100 cities, all 400 counties, all 50 states plus DC, a very high level of disaggregation. Another is the California Immigrant Data Portal, which actually also breaks things out by immigration status. It's something that we can do actually for the entire country. We only do it for California because we think in California it won't be used for evil. Letting that information out in Mississippi might yield a different result. So disaggregate data and think about metrics for accountability. Second, when you talk about equity, think about 3 dimensions of it. About the past, the legacies of discrimination, redlining, broken immigration system, and how they've created situations of dispossession and disadvantage. But remember this phrase. People often talk about, and you've heard it, communities that are left behind. I think it's important to talk about communities that are left behind. Left behind makes it sound like an accident. Like you were running and went, oh crap, we forgot some people. Instead of having lived in a system systematically put some behind others. So how do we deal with the past? How do we ensure full participation in the present? And then how do we think about the future? Because if we do not invest in these children who are being left behind and kept behind, we will do poorly as a team. And that gets to the final message, which is that we need to be thinking about a frame and a story that lifts up difference and highlights commonality. I know that's difficult. It is very hard for Americans to hold 2 ideas in their head at the same time. Those 2 ideas are that there are tremendous differences and we have a lot in common. That if we continue to reproduce this generational disadvantage, then those who are older will not have social security, will not have support. And the kind of investments we make in dealing with racial inequity, in dealing with structural disadvantage, in dealing with the working class that has been too often forgotten, all of those investments will make for a better California for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pastor, for your presentation. And good morning, everyone. My name is Yvonne Perez, and I am a Government Relations Specialist at CCRC. Before we meet our moderator and panelists, we'd like to share with you this video where younger generation explains the barriers to having a family, raising children, and building a home. Take a look.
So why do you think young people and families are struggling so much in today's economy?
Inflation, Mostly, I'm from San Francisco. I don't know if that matters, but yeah, I think none of the jobs are kind of rising with the rate of inflation, and the housing market is a show. Like, you can't get a house in SF that's less than 1 million probably, and it just seems like a lot of money for anybody who has like working class. So
just the cost of living is here in this area is really, really high with just food, gas, and it's just like even having 2 incomes is not enough, and especially if like you're renting, you don't have a mortgage, rent going up every year, it's just difficult to have a good quality of life.
Research that shows that a lot of younger people are not having kids because it's so expensive. I'm wondering what you think about that.
If you don't have support from like family and stuff, I just think it depends on like what time in your life you get kids.
it makes a lot of sense to me. Like, I don't have kids because I can barely afford to live on my own. So yeah, I don't know, like, it seems like irresponsible if I had a kid and I couldn't give it a good life, and yeah, I don't have the money for it. I want me and my partner to have the lifestyle that we want to, so I wouldn't want to like make big sacrifices where we're unhappy just to have a kid as well.
Well, I'm glad I came here then, because I'm someone, I've been wanting to have a family of my own, but current economic climate, it's really hard to, because it's not really just the cost of childcare, because obviously your children, like, they need to be able to have activities to keep them engaged, so that's why we get them toys. They need to have a safe place to live, food on the table.
Like, how do you support a family? Maybe people might have aspirations to a big family, but how do you support them? I personally have 3 daughters, and they're all in activities, and it's not cheap.
What I heard from friends that do have kids or family around me that haven't had kids is also because childcare is really expensive, is what they say, and some are, in their master's program, so they really can't afford to have a kid right now because it's like tuition or childcare, and they don't think there's enough resources out there.
I'd love to start a family, but it's just like, even now, it's just like, again, with 2 incomes, the cost of rent, it's just like you're picking your rent or raising a child, and it's just like, I think you'd have to be really set in a career to kind of start that, because it's an investment for many, many years.
How much do you think childcare costs, and how much do you think it should cost?
Childcare costs too much. It should be free.
Do you know how much it costs? Childcare costs on like a monthly basis?
How much does it cost?
No. Do you know?
No, I don't. How much?
About $2,000 a month per child.
Damn.
I definitely think that it should be accessible. At the same time, I also have friends that work in childcare, so I don't know that I want them to be paid less. Maybe just like have some state funding to go in and bridge that. I know also though a lot of people that just give up their careers because the cost of childcare is so comparable to their own incomes that it's just a wash and it's not worth it. So that seems like a big problem.
I know my sister pays like around $2,500 to $3,000 a month, and I don't know how she does it because that's just like my rent. So I don't know how she does it.
Let's see. I'd put it maybe, honestly, 2,000.
Right on. Perfect.
Right on?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm concerned even more.
Yes.
Why?
Why?
It's concerning. Like, you should be able to comfortably provide for your children, and we're living in a place where it's about as much to pay for a child's livelihood as it is to pay for a house.
Like, my mom, which I think she sent my youngest brother to an actual childcare center. I think it was like $1,000 a week, and this was like over 20 years ago, so I can only imagine how much it is now.
Do you think it was easier or more difficult to have a family in previous generations compared to today?
I definitely think, if we're speaking just here in California, I do think that it has gotten much more difficult, especially because, like, rent is rising, like even going to the grocery store is rising, so I definitely do think it's more difficult now than it was back then.
I don't know if easier is the right word. I think it was more expected or more accepted to have children back in the day. It was an accepted thing and expected actually of people to have that. So I think that really impacted the way that society was built around childcare. It was built around this expectation that you could support a family with 1 income.
I think that like in my parents' generation, it was easier because My mom, she didn't work, so, but now I think women are more like, women are going back to work, like going to work, and that's just, we work as, we hustle as like men as well, so, and we achieve higher education, and I think that leads to like jobs and going into the workforce, so.
Now I think rates are much more expensive. I know for me, when me and my partner decided to have children, I think it was something that we took into consideration, and it even caused for him to have to leave his job in order for him to be able to stay home and take care for our child.
What resources or policies do you think are needed to better support families?
I think the resources that are needed currently are maybe resources that are more, I want to say reachable, that there's not a lot of barriers to even get to the resource for the families to have. So I think those are the type of resources that need to be more out there, or the resources that are out there, they need to kind of revamp a little bit and not have so much barriers for families to even get to them.
Resources for low-income families, and I think that federal threshold has not been updated in many years, so what we think of low income now is pretty much still the same low income from 20 years ago. So I think that would be updated, and that would give us access to a bunch of different resources that exist.
So if you were wondering, those interviews were done, I think, here at Cal State Northridge with students, and the interviewers you met because one of them was Patrick McFarland and the other one was Yvonne Perez, who've both been up on the stage here. So thank you both for your work. I want to make sure that I recognize all the CCRC staff that are here, especially those who've helped to put this together. It takes an army to do this. So I'm not going to have you stand up or anything, but thank you all very much for all of this. Okay, let's bring our panelists up here. First, we have Shamika Gaskins, then we have Michael Williams, Ken Kraft, and Eva Rivera. I remembered Eva's first name and then his last name, Bill. I had a request from the first 5 people here to announce that my son, who used to work at First 5, I'm his father. I have to say, he just got his second master's degree, got an MBA, and maybe one day my kids will get launched. They're all in their 30s, and then 2 of them are still living at home. So, which is sort of some of the topic we're talking about here today, right? Okay. I do have another child who did move out, and she just got her licensed clinical social work degree. So it was a big week just before Christmas at my house. So let me introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to probably throw them all curveballs in terms of what I asked them. So we have Shamika Gaskins, who is the president and CEO of Grace and Child Poverty California and a Rosenberg Foundation Leading Edge Fellow. Her current work focuses on eradicating child and family poverty through advocating for systemic and transformational policies such as baby bonds. Before that, she was executive director of the Children's Defense Fund in California. And she was also the acting, I love these federal titles, acting deputy assistant attorney general in the Office of Legal Policy of the U.S. Department of Justice. And I'm sure she got out just before all the crazy stuff happened there, right? So, and so she's here today from Grace. Michael Williams, who I've known for a really long time, he used to work in the San Francisco Resource and Referral Agency when I first met him, probably 20 years ago, close to that. And he's now the policy director at the Child Abuse Prevention Center. His purview includes support for the California Family Resource Association, which is known as CIFRA, and the Strategies Technical Assistance, a partnership with the Children's Bureau of Southern California that facilitates county-level collaborations for child abuse prevention. Then we have Eva Rivera. She's a policy director at the Children's Partnership, where she leads the development and execution of their policy and advocacy agenda, specifically focusing on early childhood development. And then finally, Ken Kraft, who's the founder and current chief executive officer of Hope in the Mission. I keep wanting to say Hope of the Valley, but they've grown so much bigger than the Valley. And he's been there since 2009, and he's there actually running started running one of the first homeless shelters in the San Fernando Valley. And he's now branched out to like all over the place, putting together shelters. And we've had quite a few conversations about homeless shelters for families. And so he's really pushed into that in a big way. So I want to thank you all for coming today. And my first question, I know I gave you all, we sent you all questions, very specific questions to ask you. But after listening to Manuel's presentation and the disparity in terms of poverty in families and the racial component to that, and then looking at the out migration from LA County to the Inland Empire and all that, I wondered what your reaction to that presentation was. I'll just start with Shanika and maybe we can just go down the road.
Sure.
Surprise.
No. Thank you for having me, first of all. I wanted to say CCRC has been a long-time partner of the End Child Poverty California campaign, all the way back to 2018, maybe 2017. And so just been a really critical piece, part of our steering committee of a group of over 170 organizations statewide who are working and advocating together to fight child and family poverty. So I'm happy to kick us off as in terms of our reactions to our dear colleague and friend, Dr. Pastor, because what he started us off with was a great foundation to talk about what the real realities are for families in California, particularly LA County, the largest county, which is he honed in on, but also across the state. And his quest to us to think about past, present, and future is where to start. Because I think if we don't start with the history of the inequities, which he beautifully outlined, we can't really recognize why we're in this present conditions that remain. And that is, historic racism, economic oppression, as he talked about how we've intentionally divested from certain communities and continue to do so in a myriad of ways through criminal justice, over mass incarceration and other pieces. And so I think that part is where we have to start, because that then leads into, well, why are we dealing with a housing crisis? Why are we having the same battles, 30, 40 years later in terms of those racial inequities that he so outlined with the data points? And when you look across the state, it continues those factors that we had to continue to look at: housing, income, wealth. We can't even really get to wealth when you think about income, because income, we see that the white families are almost at $200,000 compared 11 times more than the lowest earners in the state. Right. And so what is happening and continually to be is that we do have a state that's progressive and is doing a lot of work to try to curb the type of that. So government action and government inaction is a huge factor in where we continue to find ourselves in the present day and the cost of living here. So I think the data is really important, because that's how we continue to understand and try to marshal more resources to where they most need it. But it's also critically important to note why we are where we are.
Yeah, I was moved, even though it was a keynote seat though, but it was especially thinking about child welfare and families, this safety net. One of your questions was around the safety net, and it got me thinking, what is the net? What's below the net? And it's all the bad outcomes we think of, homelessness and poor health outcomes. But for so many families, and especially families of color, it's state intervention in their family and removal of children. I commend people to Chapin Hall. Claire Anderson's a researcher there who has researched comprehensively every economic destabilizer is related to increased child abuse and neglect, and every economic assistance, including child care support, is shown to decrease child abuse and neglect. So there's economic stressors that all those economic inequalities come to. Then there's the biases that happen, and I think it's really important to pay attention to. And I also appreciated the imperative to look at disaggregated data, and that's what child welfare is looking at a lot right now, because it can be scary. And I'm gonna and some of the numbers I pulled in getting ready, 53% of African-American children have had their families investigated by child welfare. African-American families are 2.7 times more likely to have parental rights removed and Native American families 2.4 times more likely as white families. And anecdotally tell off the record, an unnamed county that showed the demographic data and got pushback. Wow, this is awful. And they said, oh, we're not going to disaggregate it. We're going to control it for poverty. Well, that's good. You have to look at that too. But there's a lot of accountability that comes with the disaggregated data that a lot of folks in power are afraid of, and some are stepping up to as well. So those are some of the things that struck me. So I appreciated that.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I know that my picture doesn't match my colleague's picture. I'm stepping in for my colleague, Angela Vasquez. But I appreciate the opportunity to speak today. And one of the things, as you know, my perspective, my frame has always been little kids, babies and toddlers. And as you were speaking, Dr. Pastor, I was thinking about, okay, so we know this, how are we going to prepare for it, right? Like we have it, it's all in front of us. The numbers are well written, it's all there in the sand. And right before you said, how do we prepare? How do we think about the future? That's where I was headed. And so I appreciate you saying that. And the word that came to mind was the barriers. As part of the work that we're doing with the Children's Partnership and Catalyst California and other partners that are in the room leading the Whole Child Equity Partnership, we've talked to families in the Central Valley specifically who are talking about how difficult it is to access the services that they need for their families to thrive. And so not only do the numbers speak to it, the families are speaking to it. So now what do we do? And as Shamika mentioned, California is a very progressive state on paper. And so what are we doing about that to ensure that families are actually receiving the services that they need? And that's where, you know, I think that's our call to action. Do the policies really match the needs of the family? Is it, you know, 1-to-1 ratio? Are we able to break down what we know is getting in the way of a family accessing the housing that they need, the childcare, the medical care that they need for their children to be successful? So those are the things that are coming to mind as, you know, we really are diving into this work with our Whole Child Equity Partnership. Is how do we break it down and make it simple for families? All of us in the room have an opportunity to think creatively about what that's going to take. I don't think it would be that hard, honestly, if we really listen to what families are saying they need. So that's what I'm thinking about as I heard this information.
Okay. I just want to, thank you for that keynote lecture speech. May have been short for you, but it was impactful for us. So thank you. And I think as an individual who oversees and runs, currently right now we have 21 homeless shelters, and we should be adding another 9 this next year. And a number of them are family shelters. There's probably nothing more heartbreaking than seeing kids that are homeless, because oftentimes when people are adults, maybe they've made some decisions that have led to their life station in life. But you look at these kids, and I was at one of our newest shelters that we just recently opened up in Woodland Hills. It's 100 units. There's 400 beds, but there's about 180 kids that live there. And I was there at 3:00 in the afternoon for a meeting, and all of a sudden I see these 2 big yellow school buses pull up, and all these kids come piling out. And it just hit me that these are our kids. These are our kids. And so many of them were previously living in garages, living in cars, living on the streets. And, you know, this is America. We can put somebody on the moon if we want to. We can create the highest technological advances if we choose to. But we can't care for our children. And so when I see those statistics, you know, 2 things come to mind. You know, when I look at homeless services, unfortunately, we tend to be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. Once someone's already gone over the ledge, we must build better guardrails at the top of the cliff, because when somebody goes over the cliff and they crash at the bottom, that journey and pathway back up is incredibly expensive, very difficult. And there's a lot of barriers, as you mentioned, to get people back on their feet. So I think we all within this field have to look with eyes open and anticipate, okay, if there's going to be this influx and we know we have the challenges that are in front of us, what can we do collectively? And I'm sure we'll get to some of those solutions as we keep chatting.
Yeah, so all of you have talked about the importance of the disaggregation of data that Manuel talked about, and the disparity. And then you have the disparity of poverty versus non-poverty. And I keep thinking about, there have been these enormous investments by the state. And we're now in, I think, year 3 or year 4. I can't even remember now, but it doesn't seem to have gotten to the street yet. And I wonder if, one of the things that we keep coming up about is when you start talking about families have all sorts of needs. And yet you have to go to all these different places to, to find the funding to pay for these things. And when you talk to parents, they need this, 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 and this. And it's like, well, now you got to go over here for this, over here for that. What do you think? And then we're a county-driven state. So every county is different. And all of you work across counties as we do. So how do you make all that work? What do you think that we need to do to start to address this? I mean, you sort of started to talk about that, but if you had your way, what would you build out, or how would you do it? I mean, you're all advocating on different things, but we don't all get together and navigate together. So Shanika, you try to.
Sure. I think so. First, I want to say, when you were mentioning we have made huge investments. Well, I think that it is important to note that they have had impact, right? So this past, when I was talking about government action and inaction, well, the inaction at the federal level made us put 500,000 children back into poverty, right, all across the country. And so when we saw in 2022, shamefully, we had reduced poverty by 50%, child poverty by 50%, but then it rose right back up historically. Well, but one good data point was in California, which we have been advocating for several years, and thankfully we had the leadership to try and remove deep child poverty from the CalWorks program. We saw deep poverty only move by 1%. So it was 3.3%, and then it moved to 3.4%. So we pretty much kept that stabilized. And that was because of government action in terms of keeping those TANF CalWorks levels where they need to be, for those who are in the deepest levels of poverty, to keep them stabilized. So we do have solutions that are working. The issue continues to be in the implementation side oftentimes, right? That's where the breakdown is. That's where we don't see people, actually government leaders, really listening to community, as we heard, like what actually listening to families, and understanding what is needed to have sort of integrated models of services. So when we're building affordable housing, we're including childcare, we're including wraparound services and connections that are actually culturally relevant, and maintaining and rebuilding communities, right? And now we're not building affordable housing way over here somewhere that people can't actually go to, and they get disconnected from where they've been all their life. So I think those are the things that the solutions, if I could see the models being rebuilt, some of which we have seen across the state, through federal promise neighborhood investments and the mission in San Francisco. They've been doing this work for over a decade and have really been successful in rebuilding their community. So I think we have the models. We just need to continue to fight for the resources and to uplift these things that are working.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's that voice of the community. The folks closest to feeling the harm are the ones who are closest to the solutions. And so I know in child welfare, again, the Family First Prevention Services Act is infusing money, and it is at the county level, and the state matched the funding. The federal funding will pay for some good things, like supporting families who are at risk, keeping them from being involved with child welfare. But the state funding is intended to go upstream and look at community solutions. And I think that is more of a learning curve for the county folks about, I don't know what it means to listen to the community, and how do I manage my liability if it's these broader upstream solutions. But that's going to be where it's at. And in terms of also, I know in terms of the work of the Child Care Resource and Referral and Family Resource Centers, that's a lot of the mission, is to elevate community voice, and that needs to be elevated and invested in.
You asked for like what we envision, right? Like,
Yep.
Like, I don't know you were gonna invite me again, but honestly, like when I think of families accessing services, part of me wants to just like, can we just start from scratch, tear it all down and build something that truly works for families, with families telling us, what does that one-stop shop look like, right? Like, we know families are going to need a few basic things. So how do we help coordinate at least to that? How do we make sure that they have the housing, medical care, childcare services that their children need? And from there, coordinate what else is needed that is really truly individualized. So how do we mainstream that instead of having them go, like you said, to 50 different places to get the things that they need? So really thinking about how do we as a state work together to coordinate the basic things and supporting that process. I know there's a possibility of the referral loops and making sure that people have what they need, and also thinking about like a one-stop application, simplifying it through collaborating with our partners. This is the entryway, and then supporting families. I know that there are First Fives in California that do that. How do we replicate the things that are working so that families really have what they need? And again, to go back to the Central Valley, how do we ensure that those kids are getting what they need from the get-go? Like, I envision, when families leave the hospital, you walk away with like a person that just navigates with you all of these systems. So, trying to think outside of the box and figuring out, how do we do that for families? I don't know. We're working on it.
You just described family resource centers.
That's right. But not everyone has access to
That's
that.
right.
And so how do we communicate that, and how do we share that with everybody, and not just the few that happen to know or happen to work with someone that is connected?
That's absolutely right.
And I think as it relates to family resources, at some point, it's easy to be critical. There's a lot of things that aren't being done, but there's a lot of things that are being done. We have come a long way. I remember when I first went into homeless services, you could only open up a homeless shelter in a zoning that was C2 or CM. Okay, you could only have 30 beds or less unless you got a conditional use permit. But anytime you applied for a conditional use permit, you had to have public hearings. Everybody came out, yelled and screamed, "Not in my backyard," and you couldn't make any progress. And we wondered why that there were so few opportunities for people to get off the streets. It's because policy did not allow for that. Now, when Mayor Eric Garcetti declared the first emergency shelter, it radically changed everything, because now that C2CM advanced to M1, M2 zoning, that 30-bed limit, it was lifted. So we're opening shelters with 150, 200, 230 beds consistently. And now we're starting to see scale to address the real issue. But it was only because of this willingness to declare a shelter emergency. And, if there, God forbid, if there was an earthquake tonight and, we had a bunch of buildings that were red tagged and people couldn't go back to their homes, the National Guard would be here, the Red Cross would be activated, and we would actually treat it like an emergency like it is. But unfortunately, we have had an emergency and we've said it was emergency, but then we would just yawn and go to bed and there was no real action. But the city, the county, and the state have taken action. And, I think about Project Homekey. So last year, we were able to partner with the County of Los Angeles for 3 brand new housing facilities. And the state gave the money to be able to purchase the sites, to renovate the sites. And then there's an operating subsidy that was matched by the local entity. And we were, within a month, we were full every time we opened them. Okay, but we got to start somewhere. And, one of the things that I know, it was 2 years ago that I really wanted to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. And so I chose to be homeless on the streets of Los Angeles for 1 week. Okay, now I get it. It's not really being homeless, because I knew come Friday, I'm going to sleep in my own bed. But it was 38 degrees each night. It was freezing cold. It was raining. And I experienced people telling me to get off their properties. And because I looked every bit the part, and I experienced the cold. I experienced a lot of very uncomfortable things for a guy who's never been homeless a day in his life, who's never missed a meal, who's been, has more privilege than he ever deserves. It really impacted me and just increased the empathy. But my takeaway from that is that it's nearly impossible to stay sober, sane, and safe living on the streets. And we must do everything we can to bring people indoors. Do we do we all agree that the ultimate solution is some level of affordable housing, supportive housing? Yes, but we also know that in order to build that, sometimes that takes 2, 3, 4 years. And in the meantime, we cannot leave people on the streets. The streets cannot be the waiting room for permanent housing. And thus we have worked very closely with the city and the state and even the federal government to say, okay, this is the goal. This is where we're at. And we do need interim housing. And that's why Mayor Karen Bass, when she came in, she once again reinforced the emergency shelter declaration and with their inside safe and getting people off the streets. And so I believe there's some good things happening, but we need to continue to, with a unified voice, to say it's good, but it's not enough. And we must do more because it is, I know the theme of this conference is that every child, every family deserves the highest level of care.
Great, thanks, Ken. Shamika, you want to talk a little bit about the guaranteed income pilots that have been going on and where are they going on and what have they accomplished and what do you think about it?
I support them. So, I mean, I think I'm just sitting with what Ken said because I don't know if many of you saw, but over the holiday break, a young baby who was only 1 year old passed away near LAX airport at a bus stop. Her family was houseless. Her name was Yara Rutherford. And what we are trying to do for those who are already on the streets, but also trying to make sure that people don't fall off the guardrails, comes back to things like guaranteed income and cash supports. Because, you know, who gets to live to their first birthday is really, when we talk about data and disaggregating data, we know it's most often not Black children, right? And so I think while we're continuing to do a lot of work at the state level to push these issues, to figure out to work out the county level, to deal with folks who are don't have the help and support they need and are currently on the streets, we know that the best solution is to keep families housed today, right? And so we've lost our rent relief, all the things that are continuing to make that less likely, right? So our mayor has done a lot in terms of, you know, trying to get people off the street, but we also have heard her say people continue to fall into houselessness every single day, unmeasurable numbers, right? So getting back to at the state level, what we're trying to do is find ways to continue that cash support so that you could have that extra rent payment, making sure that you can make those find the housing and keep safe housing for your children. And that includes everything from the guaranteed income pilots, which the state has invested in, $15 million. We have some in LA County. They're all across the state. In addition, there have been guaranteed income pilots happening all across the state over the last several years. I think we're up to like 50 or almost 100. And they're continuing to think about how do we move from those pilots, which thankfully have already proved what we already knew, which is if you give people cash, they can stay housed, they can get work, they can have food, they can be safe. And they don't spend it on things that are racist and, you know, stereotypical tropes, but they actually take care of themselves, right? So I think they are working to move those from pilots to policy at the state level. And so that's one thing that's happening. And then on the back end, what's already been happening for many years, thankfully in California, as Dr. Pastor talked about, is the California Earned Income Tax Credit. We were one of the first states to actually have our own tax credit separate from the federal government. And that is another way that we get over almost $1 billion into the hands of low-income families every single year, families making less than $30,000, to help make sure that they have that extra support that they need. Is it enough? No, we continue to fight for, increased the child tax credit here in California, and even to ensuring that those who are making, they're single adults so that they aren't falling into homelessness have a larger tax credit as part of the work that's happening at the state level. That all relates back to what we know the solution is, making sure that if we can't keep wages in line, all the labor work that has to happen, so we also have other ways to make sure that families get the cash they need.
Michael, you sort of mentioned Family Resource Center, maybe, since that's a big part of your job.
Yeah.
And we consider ourselves a Family Resource Center. And actually,
Right.
we're part of CIFRA.
Yeah.
But when we talk about R&Rs in general, most of them don't think of themselves as Family Resource Centers, and yet they're providing the kind of services that family. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about Family Resource Centers.
Yeah. First, I'll mention, the guaranteed income, the child tax credit, also associated with reductions in child abuse and neglect. So those are very critical. Family resource centers, and I hope I wasn't being glib saying you're describing them, because and you're exactly right, they're not consistently available. So there have been a couple studies and reviews. The difficulty with Family Resource Centers, so the California Family Resource Association has been the last few years seeking state funding for family resource centers. And the difficulty is people think in terms of, well, what's the model that can go to scale? What's the model we can apply in every community that will work? But the thing that really works is they're of the community and they're a community solution. They have some common elements. They have a family-friendly hub and environment. They have those people who do that brokering and hand-holding through benefits. They are focused on community transformation and social justice. They also implement evidence-informed practices. They're a family, they're meant to be that one-stop shop and that family-friendly one-stop shop, but also not just to get public benefits, but for personal empowerment, for becoming builders of the community. I want to give a shout out actually right over here to the Pasadena, Altadena Coalition of Transformative Leaders that Yvonne Trevino is their ED, and she says, the first thing she'll say is families come and we say, what can you give to the community while we're helping you out? And it's a mutual exchange. So they're really built on that. And in the National Family Resource Network, there's a saying though, when you've seen one family resource center, you've seen one family resource center. So it is diverse, but we are, there are some common elements of the work that we described in that community level of being a voice of the community.
Great. So I'm sitting here thinking, so one of the most difficult pieces, speaking of child development, has been the whole movement about infant mental health and really convincing people that there's an issue around infant mental health. And I wonder if you could amplify that somewhat.
Absolutely. Like, and first of all, what is infant mental health, right? And educating individuals who are not in the field around, yes, just like you take your child to the doctor to make sure that their heart and their, lungs are developing fine, that's part of health. And so is our emotional and social development. That is part of health as well. And so it's really important. And it's, we talked a little bit about the cliff and upstream interventions, right? Like, what does that really mean? This is an upstream intervention, right? It's making sure that kids have what they need from the get-go to ensure that they can develop safely, grow successfully, and making sure they have a home is an upstream intervention. It's making sure that their infant and early childhood mental health is well. It's making sure that they're not stressed, that their families are not stressed, that they are able to worry and think about the things that are important to young children. And so having access to those supports in early care and education centers where babies and infants and toddlers are is really, really important. Educating providers and their families about, like, when you do this, you're actually supporting your baby's health, the infant and early childhood mental health. That's what it means. When you're reading, when you're talking, when you're playing, when you're singing, that's supporting all of that as well. So being able to break it down as to, what it is and what it isn't is super, super important. And it is an early, upstream intervention, as I said. Making sure that we have funding to support that is really, really critical. I know our governor has been supporting the Child, Youth, and Behavioral Health Initiative, but making sure that we have set aside specifically for our young children is really, really important. That we're not missing that birth to 5, that birth to 3. It's critical. So while all of our services are important, we want to make sure that we're calling those out, that there are, just like we're putting money aside for adults, we need to have that set aside specifically called out for young children to ensure that they're getting the services that they need early on.
Great. So Ken, we're working on a project together. You want to talk about it?
Yeah, and this is really exciting.
Yeah, it is.
But I'm going to lay a foundation for it by sharing a recent story. I was talking to one of the moms who was new into the shelter, and she was sitting down, and her little girl had laid her head down on her mom's lap. And I said, so where were you before you came here? And she said, I was at a very scary motel on Sepulveda Boulevard. And she said there was all kinds of drug use and prostitution and gangs. And about that time, her little daughter lifted up her head and said, and bugs. And I thought, you know what? we can do so much better. We can do so much better. And when you talk to the moms, oftentimes, sometimes getting facilities open can be a challenge because of people's concerns. What are you going to do to our neighborhood and all that? But when you're dealing with moms, for the most part, that are experiencing homelessness and they have children, they do anything for their kids. All they want is for their kids to make it. I mean, and they toe the line, they follow the rules, they do what needs to be done, but they need help. They need to get a job. They need to be able to go back to work. But one of the greatest barriers, there you are, you have your own room and your own bathroom, and you've got case managers that are helping with documentation and job placement. But what do I do with my child? I mean, when I watched that video, $2,000 a month. Okay. They don't have any money. We're just trying to get them back on their feet. It is a catch-22. How do you do this? Well, I am so excited to announce our partnership with CCRC that we're going to be at the new shelter in Woodland Hills. It's called the Woodlands, right across from Taft High School on Winnetka and Ventura Boulevard, that has 100 units, 400 beds. When we purchased it, we also purchased a Denny's restaurant. And that Denny's restaurant, we kept thinking, what's the highest and best use for this? I'm thinking, should we do some kind of social enterprise with, food services and this and that? And then as I began to realize how many single moms and kids, we realized, no. We need daycare. We need preschool right here on site with the shelter. And so we reached out to CCRC and they said, no, that's exactly what we need. They said, that's been our vision. That's what we need. We just need to it was the right time, right place, right resources. And so I went there yesterday just to check on the construction, and everything's been demoed. And now we're going to start building it out. And it's going to be really a state-of-the-art facility designed in partnership for the children that are there and the moms, so that the moms can go to work and the smaller kids have that early childhood care.
Yeah, I have to share with you that Ken called me and said, hey, we're thinking about putting childcare into this Denny's, which is always an interesting. And he said, will you sign a letter of support so we can get a loan to build it out? And I said, Ken, you don't need to borrow money for that. We can get you Head Start money for that. I'm sure that the federal government and Office of Head Start would just love to have a program at a homeless facility. So that's what we've been working on ever since. So you're right about there are things going on the local level, but it's the tying together the local stuff to the state stuff, to the national stuff. And something that, Mike, that you said sort of made me think about, you talked about evidence-based practice. Now, I'm old enough to remember a time when there wasn't such a thing as evidence-based practices. We came up with, here's what we need to do. And then we tried to figure out how we could get somebody to fund it. And then we did it. And then everything became, no, we got to have research. It's got to be, university-based and all that. And when all of you talk about, we need to listen to what families need, and we need to listen to what they talk about, that sort of runs in the face of evidence-based practices. So how do you balance that out? Have any of you thought about that? I mean, is this something that comes up in your minds, or is this a crazy idea of mine? But we built Childcare Bridge, which is childcare for foster parents, based on a very small pilot in LA County that we now have built into a statewide program. But that started off, and we had to study it first, because otherwise you wouldn't get to how do you take it to scale? What about this dichotomy between evidence-based and listening to people with lived experience and all that? Because we seem to be shifting back to that. So go ahead, Eva, you got.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, so within our work at the Children's Partnership, we're really looking at community-defined evidence-based practices, right? So bringing those two pieces together. What is community saying, and how do we take what we know as evidence-based and really blend those two pieces together? Community knows what they need, and we know we've known it forever. It's a matter of listening to that. And so using that community defined perspective to really drive the interventions, to drive the solutions, and be really strengths focused, right? Like every family is unique. Like you said, you've met one CCRC, you've just met one. Same thing with families, right? Like we can look at families of color and say they have many things that are in common, but they're all so unique. And so earlier when we looked at the questions, there was a question in there about oh my gosh, the mandated supporting system and why that's so
Right.
different. Well, we're looking now and shifting the narrative and shifting the perspective, looking at what is it that this unique family needs and what are the systems available to support that. That to me is a community defined evidence-based practice. We know we have a lot of knowledge. So it's a true collaborative approach where we take what we know as professionals in the field, but then we also take what families know, and families know their family best. They are the experts on their children. So we take that knowledge and then create solutions that really set them up for success and really, climbing rather than keeping them behind.
So I do have to make a comment on, in 1990, a group of us wrote a paper called From Child Welfare to Child Well-Being. So it's now 35 years later. Like, how old is this guy? It's 35 years later, and we're just now beginning to talk about going from mandated reporting to mandated supporting. And mandated supporting is really a paradigm shift in a major way. And I worry that 35 years from now, I'll be over 100 years old. I don't think I'm going to be around for that. So how do we make these things move faster? I don't know if any of you want to talk about, Ken talked about how in the last 3 years, it's like it has to get so bad that somebody says, we got to do something about it finally. So where's the squeaky wheel on some of these things?
Well, I just on the mandated supporting, I'm not here as a commissioner on the LA Commission for Children and Families, but that is where the conversation started actually with community.
Yep.
And so I think, as Eva said, we are seeing not just a shift, but we've always had some pretty good researchers who were cognizant, some in the room, about the need to be community informed. And so they were just fewer and far between.
Yep.
And I think now we are finally getting more academic institutions to come along and actually listen and do that community defined work. But there've always been a few, and thankfully, those are the ones who have been leading the charge with social justice organizations to do this work in a better way. But so I think there's a shift at academia, but there's never really been a shift in community because we have always known that that's where the solutions were. We just needed people to listen to us and put the data with what we were saying and the research there. On mandated supporting, I'm really excited about that. And that actually moved really fast when you think about it. Like it was started off as a conversation, a conference where families were coming and talking about what was happening. And then being able to move that into policy within, a year or two to now that's a statewide initiative being championed by the CDSS. I think we have a lot of momentum and that we need to just continue to keep going and working and keeping those families at the center. I think the fact that we are looking at disaggregated data finally in the child welfare system and thinking about those impacts of things like CalWorks, like we've been doing a lot of work in our coalition and with others across the state around how do we reimagine CalWorks, because we know that that is a pipeline into the child welfare system. Every dollar more that we spend in TANF, that reduces 8% the child welfare involvement. So I think part of what has been people actually finally listening and doing the work that it takes to actually talk to those families and validate what they have been saying for decades, which is I am mistreated. I'm over-policed in my community, over-policed in my home. When we talk about families, we are often taught, and I'm sorry, I'm going to say this, we're talking about moms and children. We never talk about the dads. I had a very present father. We were still poor. But if we had to go to the child welfare office, he had to stay home, right? So I think that is the type of work that we have to continue to do and talk about the disparities, the racism, all the undercurrents that underlie all these systems. And as we try to tick away at them and break them down policy by policy, shift by shift, that we're not forgetting about those pieces.
I just want to move things faster.
I know, me too.
Yeah.
And I was gonna say, when I look at, of course, my lens is through homelessness, and I look at the huge advancements we've made in the last few years. And one of the accelerants to this expansion of homeless services was a lawsuit. It was a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles. And the lawsuit basically, the Alliance for Human Rights said, listen, LA, you keep wiping out all these encampments, but you have no place for people to go. So you're basically just traumatizing people over and over and over again. But it took activism. It took people being fed up and saying, this is not okay, and we're not going to stand by, and we're not going to tolerate it. And so it actually forced the hand of government to do something. And then, of course, Judge David Carter got involved, and he basically said, look, you know what, I'm not going to let you enforce your no camping laws anymore until such time as you can, show that you've got beds for 60% of the previous year's homeless count. And some city council members took that as a challenge. Okay. I mean, one of the highlights of my life is when I was able to stand with Mayor Eric Garcetti and Councilman Paul Krikorian. And Councilman Krikorian, after we'd opened the 5th shelter in his district, said, I can now proudly say we have beds for everybody that is homeless in my council district. But it first took a lawsuit. And so I think we have to be willing to put ourselves out there and to fight for what is right. And when we do, sometimes things are going to go our way, and it's going to be that accelerant to make things happen, to move things along quickly, and so we can help more people.
Great. Any other thoughts or?
I have a thought. So my background is not in policy. This is actually my first year in this space. I come from direct service. I come from working in Head Start programs and being directly with families, also home visiting background, et cetera. And one of the reasons why I came to the policy world is because I recognize the lack of knowledge and information that our families have. A lot of people don't know about what's happening. They don't know that they have access to things, or that these services are being voted on or thought about. And so as we work with families in the CCRCs and our centers, we need to make this information accessible to families. We need to ensure that they have at their fingertips. And I know it sounds like really like idealistic and like, yeah, we know that, but what are we doing about it? What do families really know and understand about what propositions are coming in March? There is a big proposition coming around mental health, funding. Do people know what that means? Do we really break it down, and do we as providers do enough to ensure that our families are educated on the things that impact them? So I think that's a big call to us. If we sometimes have a hard time understanding what all of this means in our world, how do we really break it down for families who are not in the space and who are truly being impacted by what's happening in their day-to-day life? So that's something that I am cognizant of, and I'm trying to think about how do we get this to families as needed.
Well, and I think of in the child care resource and referral world, there's such a great model in the Parent Voices movement, and they have had courtroom success this last year. Great funding increases at the R&R network, definitely. But I saw those blue T-shirts at the hearings where I was asking for funding, and the blue T-shirts got more. But and that's it. Yeah, parent-driven, relational. Get the information and mobilize.
Well, my commercial would be that, when everybody talks about how do these systems work together, there was a presentation at one of the Child Welfare Council meetings, and they talked about all these various systems, Family Resource Center and all that. And I think you were there, Mike. And at the end of it, I said, you make a mention of the child care bridge, you make a mention of more investment in child care, but you don't talk about it as being a system that you need to be integrated with. And when you look at across the state and you look at our world, which, the child care resource and referral, child care voucher subsidy system, we're serving somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 children between the ages of 0 and 12. A third of those are school-age kids. 2/3 of those are infant toddlers and preschoolers. And there's a wide variety of places that you could connect these systems together, and it's through already existing things. And so our task is to how do you integrate across these various systems? And that's why we wanted you all to be here, because you all represent different parts of that system. And so part of this was, let's get these people here to talk about this stuff. And then how do we work together on some of these things? So you heard Ken, we're going to build several Head Start sites. And we've been looking at the demographics, going back to what Manuel was saying. We've been looking at the demographics and saying, gee, we've been running Head Start in San Fernando Valley, but the population is growing in the Antelope Valley. That's where the little kids are going to be. We need to move more of our resources there. We now have 4 very large centers. I have to check with my Head Start people, make sure I get it right. 4 very large centers in the Antelope Valley, because we know that that's where the population is going to be. And we do integrated services in Head Start, but that's the only place where that happens for that age group. So we're getting close to the end of our time. So any last thoughts that you want to throw out there before we wrap up?
Well, I'm a proud Head Start graduate, so I will say that.
Yeah.
So,
Can we get your picture and put you on the cover?
maybe I wish I could find my graduation picture, my little white cap and gown. But I distinctly remember it. I mean, I think part on the policy advocacy side, we are doing that work. We're working together, where you all are key voices in our coalitions and around the state, and we're showing up for each other, and we're speaking with one accord, and not being pitted against each other when it comes to state dollars. And so I think that is is a piece that we cannot underestimate, and the power in that. And I think we just need to do more around building out, as Eva said, sort of that integration of what we know to the families on the front lines, and actually making sure that they are driving our policy advocacy at the state level. And you all are natural partners to continue to do that with, so that we are actually listening to community.
Great. Mike?
What she said.
What she said? So I have a message to send Mike. OCAP is wanting to invest like little piddly amounts of money to coordinate in districts, $50,000 to coordinate in districts. Go back and tell them that needs to be a much larger number.
OCAP has piddly amounts of money
well, then somebody needs to tell somebody it needs to be bigger.
The state does. Yeah, it needs to shift.
Yeah. Eva?
To your point about integration, as I mentioned earlier, we are partnering with Catalyst California and First Five and others in the room as part of the Whole Child Equity Partnership to do just that. Like, how do we integrate? We are a multi-sector coalition to inform how do we break down the barriers for families across the state of California and truly make this the best place to have, be, and raise a child. And so that's a very exciting part of the work, so that policymakers at the state level can see, like, oh, there are people speaking on health issues that haven't traditionally been part of the health conversation, and people are getting involved and engaged in crossing those barriers and those rooms that we haven't traditionally been a part of. But that's because we're working with the same families. The left hand needs to know what the right hand is doing and really truly be coordinated, integrated in how we support them. So that's really exciting. And I'm excited to be a part of that and to see that really come to fruition over the next few years.
Great. Ben, you're the practitioner in the room, as you told me.
My final thoughts would be, let's not grow weary in doing good. We've got to persevere and press on. It was a little over a year ago that, again, part of my journey is to experience some of what other people go through. And so one of the motels that we were able to purchase was on Alvarado and 3rd. And this particular motel, I went there when we were considering buying it, and it was pay by the hour. Okay. It was a very, a blight on the community. And so myself and our president, we said, why don't we go spend the night there? So we can see what is it really like for sometimes families that have to spend the night here. And I'm usually up for most everything, but we paid our money, and he had his room and I had my room. And so we went to my room first, and there's all these burn marks on the bedspread from the crack pipes, and pulled the sheets back, and it was like hair and other stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, this is supposed to have been cleaned. And I lifted up the mattresses, there was condoms and there was syringes. And I said, I really don't know if I could do this. He goes, well, hold on. I brought a black light. And so he turned off the light, and I saw things I cannot unsee. And I said, okay, let's go check out your room. So we went up to his room and same thing, but his turned the black light and there was a splatter mark across the ceiling, like someone had blown their brains out. And the room next to us had already had the door that was plywooded because when the sheriffs broke in because of child trafficking. And I was there. I've run from Vegas to LA, Death Valley to LA. I'm getting ready to ride my bike to Washington, D.C., do stupid things to put a spotlight on homelessness. But I sat there and I thought, there's families. This is the final backstop. This is your final backstop before you're actually on the streets. And I thought, this is traumatizing because I found myself thinking, I don't know if I could do this. And I'll be totally honest with you. I told the president, I'm the CEO, but I told him, I said, look, the only way I'm doing this, and you can't tell anybody, but I'm sleeping in this bed with you. You got it? Okay, you're on that side, I'm on this side. And sure enough, the moment I laid my head back, the person who was filming it, we documented, cockroaches, and these cockroaches come running out of the light socket towards my head. I made it. I made it through the night. But again, that's one night. That has nothing to do with the trauma that these moms, these kids experience every day. And so we must fight for those who oftentimes can't fight for themselves. We must be a voice for those who oftentimes are voiceless. And as we do, we'll continue to raise the bar and help more and more people.
Right. So I want to thank all of you because you are the champions. You don't think so? Huh?
No. The people he's talking about are the champions.
Yeah. Well, you are the champions for the people who can't talk for themselves. And you're the ones who took the truth to power. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. LaWanda Wesley, the Director of Government Relations. I just want to quickly, before we get started, do another shout out to my team, Government Relations team. Can you raise your hands? Yvonne Perez, Patrick McFarland, Maria Romo, Julia Terry. I also want to give a big shout out to to communications. That's our other arm. If you all could stand really quickly, it's important to me to acknowledge your hard work. Big hugs and kisses. And then I want to give a shout out to the fabulous research team, Susan Savage, Sandy, where are you? If you will stand. Thank you. And of course, to my boss, Donna Sneeringer, who I also like to think of as a friend and a colleague. Thank you. If you will stand. I know everyone knows you, but stand, please. And Dr. O, I always give him a hug because he reminds me a lot of my grandpa, but I also match his spirit, and there's something about him that's special. So with all of that said, Dr. Pastor, I want to say thank you for your remarks this morning. I thought about disaggregated data through an equity lens. I think about that daily. And I also think that equity is about the resources that you pour in. Equality is about getting everyone there and being on the same par. Shamika, I want to thank you for your remark. You and I grew up very much the same, but something that stood out to me was about promising neighborhoods and guarantee cash supports is necessary, moving from a pilot to being more permanent. Michael, you said, why am I here? You touched me. You don't know that. We're part of your coalition, the California Family Resource Association, and your remark about community voice, having a one-stop shop, and then parent voices is critical. Eva, I'm just meeting you for the first time, and I appreciate talking about rebuilding systems and making sure that the information is accessible to the families. And then Ken, you really touched my heart by saying the streets can't be a place where people wait. So with that said, it's time to hear your voices in the room. You are the community. I know some of us feel a little bashful around that, but you are the community. We are the community. Some of us have lived these experiences. We have family members, or we know someone, or we're doing the work on behalf. So we are the ones who are in service of that. So now I'm going to read the remarks that Yvonne gave me because I'm supposed to follow directions. To get you started with your table conversations, including you all who are there virtually. So here are my remarks. Before we end the discussion for today, we'd like for you to engage in an open conversation and exchange thoughts among yourselves. There are 3 questions. So at your table, if you hold up, there's a card in front of someone. Please hold them up. You may be the one who is reporting out. Ha ha ha. We you will have about 10 minutes or so to engage in a fruitful conversation. Feel free to answer all three, but because time is short, we know you may only get to one or two. So look at those questions carefully. I won't read them out. Also for you who are online, there will be a staff member who will help facilitate the conversation online. You will place your remarks in the chat and they will read out. We'll read that out ourselves. And then Yvonne and Patrick will come around and support and facilitate as well as myself. So let's have a conversation, not let's just be listeners. Let's think about how we can be doers and execute. And that starts with a conversation. So let's start the conversation now. We'll tell you when time is up. It'll be about 10 minutes or so. We'll reconvene and share quick highlights. When you share back out, let's make it a 30-second share. That way we stay on time with the program. All right, let's get started.
So just kind of like making that route to information and resources a little bit more clear and direct, and removing the hurdles that families have to get through to even get involved in the first place.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Williams from the ACEs Aware Initiative. And the first thing that we tackled was the first question, which we really learned that there are high turnover rates among ECE educators. And one of the biggest reasons is low pay. The other thing is within the younger generations, it's people want a side hustle, people want to work for a couple of years and move on. Whereas when you look at ECE educators, many of them have been there for 20, 25, 30 years. So what can we do to supplement their pay? Well, when we stepped back even more, we realized that so many issues, domestic violence, mental health, juvenile justice, homelessness, the thing that fuels and funds these is taxpayer money. And if we want to do something other than a regressive tax, we're really going to have to be serious about taxing multimillionaires and billionaires. And we're going to have to be serious about taxing things like golf courses, which do not pay their fair share of taxes due to a little known law on the books passed in the 1960s. So if we want to generate more revenue to subsidize early education providers, we need to do more to tax the people who can afford it. And we need to have the courage to challenge our politicians to take this on. And we need to have the courage to build coalitions to do this as well.
Okay. Hi, my name is Christy Fenrich. I'm in the People and Culture Division here at CCRC. So our table talked about all the questions, but I want to speak to the third question about barriers being removed to have the positive outcomes that we were discussing today. And one of the first things that came to mind was free childcare, or at least incredibly reduced thresholds to the cost of childcare. But another thing we spoke about, just as an idea about that would, I think, contribute to the bonding, the baby bonding with new babies introduced into families, and helping solidify those relationships and the mental infant health well-being, is expanding the parental leave that's offered in the United States and in California, right? So you get X amount of time. It's 12 weeks. If you're, in FMLA, the United States, it's a little bit more. Here in California, we have more leave laws, but expanding that time that new parents are able to bond with their children at home, to, be more in line with the rest of the developed world, I think could really have a positive impact on those foundational relationships.
Thank you. We'll take one more and then we'll go to virtual and then we'll close out.
Good afternoon. My name is, or morning still, wow. Amy Westling, the Association of Regional Center Agencies. Our table spent a lot of time talking about question one in terms of funding decisions, and we really took it in the direction also of policy decisions that have been made in California. And ours feels very pragmatic compared to the rest of you. We talked about some of the tremendous opportunities available through CalAIM, but also needing time and space to figure out how those changes will impact this population and integrate with all of the other services that are also trying to serve these same families, and how to coordinate all of that. And we also talked about the dynamics related to state contracting and the realities that the complexities in some of those contracts make it so that those dollars don't actually get spent because of the timelines associated with contracting and all of the then timelines for spending the dollars. And so it sends the wrong message that the dollars aren't needed. And that's just not the case.
We also had a lot of discussion around the ARPA federal funding cliff and what that means for all of our programs and the advocacy that we're going to want to keep doing on behalf of our communities and programs that serve them, to ensure we're closing that gap. That's really important. And then lastly, just make sure I got this right on my notes. New policies that we want to see upcoming this year. We want to look at more policies that are targeting families with incomes that fall just outside of what qualify them for our services, whether or not that means moving more towards middle income families or redefining what our poverty lines would be. That would be a fantastic way to expand availability of services to our communities.
All right. Thank you all for taking some time to talk and think about everything we've heard this morning. And thank you to the CCRC team for facilitating that. Always interesting to do in-room and online and figure out how long it's going to take. I did want to just close up with a few things. I was really struck by the fact that we really need to keep in mind the legacy of inequality in our state. The idea that we have communities that are kept behind and not left behind really struck me. And that we really have an opportunity to lift up not just the differences amongst us, but also the commonalities and the common humanity that we share. I think it's going to be a hard year. Our political discourse is very difficult right now. And the more we can find common ground and common purpose, I think the better we're going to do in serving kids and families. We have really enjoyed all of the presenters today. Thank you to our panel, to Dr. Pastor, to the students who were on our video. I thought it was really impactful to have their voices in the room. You may or may not know that they're still on winter recess here at Northridge, otherwise you would see them and meet them, but we really appreciate their time. And I want to also just acknowledge our funding support from First 5 LA. We couldn't do this without them. We really appreciate them and their contribution. And we also had a few additional staff from different elected offices joining us, including Mirka Martinez from LA City Council Member John Lee's office, Catherine Castrillon from Senator Carolyn Menjivar's office, Sulema Landa from Assembly Member Aguiar Curry's office and the Legislative Women's Caucus online, and Yvonne Perez from the office of LAUSD Board Member Kelly Gonez. So we really appreciate them being here and being part of the conversation. Lastly, you may notice in the middle of your tables, there are baskets. And I know often when you go to these kinds of things, somebody gets the centerpiece. This is not that thing. What we wanted to show you tangibly were some of the things that we give to families on a daily basis. And if you look at the baskets, they're all slightly different. All our families need slightly different things. And all of these come from donations and support. And we just thought it was a way to really represent what families are needing and what support we are giving in a tangible way. So they're mostly here for you to take a look at, and then we are going to distribute them to families. So really appreciate the opportunity to share some of the work we do with our Family Resource Center. And I think my hope for this coming year, it appears we're going to have a challenging state budget conversation this year. But I think there's a lot of opportunity as well. We have a lot of work to do to really think differently about our service delivery, to really clean up integration opportunities, and to embrace partnership. And that doesn't take new money. That takes us looking differently at the rules, the regulations, the statute, our partnerships with each other, our contracts. I was happy to hear contracts come up. And how can we all work together to really look for that common ground and make a positive step forward in this coming year. So thank you all so very much. One last shout out to the entire CCRC team. As Mike said, it takes an army. I will tell you, it takes a village, and I couldn't do it without all of them. And we really look forward to seeing you throughout the year at our events or at different trainings. And certainly you can continue to follow all the policy issues online on our website and in our social media. And just thank you all so much for starting your year here.